Christ is risen. Truly he is risen. Well, we're talking about the history of the church, and we started with this chair and this icon of the resurrection. And the reason we started there is because the history of the church is about sharing the great and marvelous news about the resurrection of Jesus Christ, about going from this life to the next life. And we established that Jesus is enthroned. This is his church, and we are his emissaries, his ambassadors. We talked about how the church started and moved out of Jerusalem and into the Roman world and developed through the councils to become a formal church. Let's fast forward to around the year 800 or so, and we've moved away from Jerusalem and away from the early patriarchates near in the Mediterranean world of Rome, Constantinople, Jerusalem, Antioch, and Alexandria. Those were the centers. But what happens over the course of time? People develop ideas on their own. And let me give you an illustration. Suppose I were a chef and I had some dough and some tomato sauce and some cheese. And I deposited those ingredients in New York and Chicago and in Los Angeles. And then I let 100 years go by. I let 200 years go by. I let 300 years go by. In New York, somebody says, true pizza is made with a thin crust. And in Chicago, they're going to have a deep dish. And in California, they're going to have whatever it is. Same ingredients, same idea of pizza, but developed differently in different places because of the different cultures. And that's what happened over the course of time. You had on this side of the empire, in the Greco world, in the Greek world, in Constantinople and in the other Eastern bishops, Eastern patriarchates, a way of looking at the world which was philosophical, debated, and a lot of heresies came out of that, a lot of ideas came out of that. And on the Roman side, in the Roman world, which we'll say is on this side, you had stricter rules, more defined ideas, something that's adhering to what things were in the beginning. So you have different traditions growing out with different languages, different practices, different cultures. And so after a while you have, by the year, say, 800 and going on, really one big church going back to Christ, but with different expressions. And this creates separation, distance between people, and especially during a time when they were unable to communicate directly, a gulf emerges between the churches of the East and the churches of the West. And so you have, for instance, in the West, the development of their communion with unleavened bread, which is a hearkening back to the times of the Last Supper when they used unleavened bread. In the East, they added yeast to their bread, and they liked the idea of that being resurrectional. You had different practices, same body and blood of Christ, but different practices. In East, the government of the church is between different bishops who are kind of collegial and sharing power, at least in theory. Most of the authority being governed in Constantinople, but then sort of a debate. In the West, because there weren't as many bishops and patriarchs, most of the power was coming from Rome, and so this becomes a central authority. So you have centralized authority versus collegial authority, and over the course of time, the churches develop into two different entities. Also during that time, there's an attack on the East from another religion. Islam comes in the 600s, and the churches of the East start to wane in political power, while in the West, the political power starts to rise. By the year 800, there's even a new political entity called the Holy Roman Empire. And so you have a rising political reality in the West, and a lowering political reality in the East, and you have differences of opinion and theology and worldview, so that by the time you get to about the year 1054, there is a tremendous gap in the churches in terms of their way of looking at the world, and there's enmity between them. There's hostility. And the West has begun their crusades in order to rescue Jerusalem from the hands of the Muslim leaders. And along the way, there is increased tension between the Eastern and the Western churches. By 1054, the Patriarch of the East and the Pope of the West excommunicate each other, and that's called the Great Schism. And since 1054 until the present age, we've been developing along separate lines. That's all for today, and we're going to continue on from there. Lord, be with us and bless us and help us to seek unity. Amen.